know some of you, and I look forward to seeing you more. Many thanks to Amy and Mick, particularly in indulging me some time to share with you some of the stuff that I do. But before I get into the topic, which really is the lessons of fly fishing literature, I just want to go back and thank a couple of you. Last week's call, I guess it was Jim Saraceno. I had mentioned that I tend to be I tend to lean on using woolly buggers, and particularly a lot of blueback. He gave me the tip of doing it without so much hackle to avoid possible, snagging in the tippets. And I fish a lot of Westover and a little piney. I just love the little trout that I pick up there, and it worked great. And then I fished a lot with soft hackle, all kinds of soft hackle, and for some reason they were just doing wonders on both of those streams. So thanks to all of you, and to Jim in particular for the tips. As Amy and Mick know, I wanted to just share a little bit about some of the interest that I have in fly fishing from the perspective of using the literature of fly fishing to convey its meaning and value. Real quick, just on my background, I've been at WashU for a million years, and most of my time I helped run the evening division there called University College. So I put together and managed all sorts of programs for part-time adult learners. And then when I teach psychology. Somewhere along the line, because I've fished as long as I've taught, somewhere along the line, it occurred to me that what I learned on the water and reading about what other people reflect about on the water is probably as, if not more, helpful in terms of how we grow, how we learn, how we change as adults. So I started putting together classes for people of all ages on that. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight. And hopefully it'll be a different perspective and maybe a bit of a change of pace on the tying of flies. What I'd like to do is to just kind of, talk for a little bit about the value that I find in fly fishing by studying it this way, and then spend some time sharing with you some excerpts, some of my favorite excerpts that illustrate those points, and then open it up, for discussion. Needless to say, I like to gab about this stuff, but please, at any point, jump in. I mean, this has to be a conversation, so please jump in. So let me just start by saying that, at least from my experience, I've read a lot about sort of the literature of fly fishing. And there are two kind of general kinds. And one is the instructional kind that, we've all read, whether it's reading, Tom Rosenbauer or the Learning Center from the Orvis site, or Fly Fishers International, every one of the big organizations. So there's an awful lot of great stuff about teaching how to do it, how to tie and how to cast and how to make, rods, et cetera, that I've learned a lot from. The other kind, though, that I focus on is, what I'll call the sort of the contemplative or the reflective literature. And that's kind of what I do. And that's what I teach and think about it. So let me start by just reading something very briefly. Some of you may have heard of the author Robert Traver. He was really a judge in real life, but he wrote Trout Madness and a bunch of other stuff like that. But there's a little piece that he wrote in 1964 that really portrays to a lot of us in very quick, simple terms why fly fishing is important. So let me just quickly read this. And this is called Testament of a Fisherman. By the way, I have a list of sort of my favorite readings that I've given to Amy and Mick that I think they've got. I've got it. I can share it on the screen, or I can send it to them and they'll distribute it if you want it, okay? But this is called The Testament of a Fisherman. And I love this little piece for starting off. He says, I fish because I love to, because I love the environs where trout are found, which are invariably beautiful, and hate the environs where crowds of people are found, which are invariably ugly. because of all the television commercials, cocktail parties, and the sordid social posturing I thus escape. Because in a world where most men seem to spend their lives doing things they hate, my fishing is at once an endless source of delight and an act of small rebellion. Because trout do not lie or cheat and cannot be bought or bribed or impressed by power, but respond only to quietude and humility and endless patience. Because I suspect that men are going along this way for the last time, and I, for one, don't want to waste the trip. Because mercifully, there are no telephones on trout waters, although we know that's not true anymore. Because only in the woods can I find solitude without loneliness. Because bourbon out of an old tin cup always tastes better out there. Because maybe one day I will catch a mermaid. And finally, not because I regard fishing as being so terribly important, but because I suspect that so many of the other concerns of men are equally unimportant and not nearly so much fun. That's the testament of a fisherman. So my interest in looking at all this stuff is really taking a look at kind of the what I'll call the examined life, how we look at our lives. And for me, fly fishing becomes the kind of the intersection of four things that I've looked at and kind of studied for a while. One, and most importantly, is just fishing itself, the experience of fishing and the literature of fishing. Two, the field that I used to teach is a field of psychology, adult development. And basically what that is the normal changes in our lives, especially during those times of great transition, whether it's midlife, whether it's loss, whether it's marriage, whether it's having a kid, whether it's a divorce, all these things that change. And the way I've always looked at it is that during those times, typically all the rules we brought to our lives stop working. And we have to kind of put it on pause and figure out how to change, how to pivot and change course. And those are the times in particular, times of great change, when we ask those basic questions, who am I? How do I relate to others? How do I give back? So that's an element of adult development. I also studied how people learn. And in particular, I was interested in a kind of learning that has to do with always examining and challenging and changing our assumptions, always looking critically at how we think about things. Learning is really two components. Component one is the experience itself. But people who study this field for a long time say that's about 70% of it, it maybe even less. The other part of learning is the reflection. So you can have an experience, but if you don't think about it, if you don't reflect about its meaning, you don't really learn. So there's learning. And then there's another aspect of psychology, a field called depth psychology that I'm interested in, I taught. And it really has to do with things like the unconscious, the unknowns, what's typically called the shadows in our lives, the things we don't like, the darker sides of our life. And depth psychology are people that typically say, things aren't as they appear. What you see is largely a compensation for what you don't see. So I find that very interesting in the way it's illustrated in the world of fly fishing. So, how does that, what does that share with the literature of fly fishing? One of the books that's on the list, a great book called Haunted by Waters by a guy who teaches out in Kansas right now. He says that the literature of fly fishing, like all literature, he calls it an investigation into what it means to be a human being. And that's pretty powerful and pretty fundamental, but that's important. The other way I look at it is, in looking at this stuff, it's all about water and it's all about words. Water, the river, the stream, the lake, whatever you call it, to me, symbolizes sort of the natural flow of nature. Things we often, try to predict and understand and control, but ultimately we can't. The words, the people who write about it, that's how we try to make sense of what we can't control and we can't understand. So all this great literature is really about the words that try to make sense of the water and the water of our lives that, we try to understand every day. So all that put together, sort of for me, why is fly fishing valuable from this perspective? In addition to just, having great friends, helping people, and pursuing great causes like this one. So for me, the full experience of fly fishing has always helped me kind of define, purpose, navigate the changes in my life, clarify relationships in my life, and solve problems, both personally and in my work. We all talk about, reading the water, and it's helped me read the water and read the water of my own life. For me, fly fishing has always taught essential skills for living and working and for leading people. Things like communication, trust building, collaboration, critical thinking, conflict management, agility, curiosity, all of these kinds of essential skills I learn on the water as well as, in books. For me, it's sharpened, I hope, my insight, my self-understanding, my self-awareness. It also highlights the beauty of the natural world as a place to learn, as a place to really learn about and what the world can teach us. Additionally, for me, it has, as I implied earlier, it has revealed my shortcomings, my shadows, my vulnerabilities, my mistakes. It's helped me understand those, accept those, change those when I can. It's helped me understand and reframe things like confusion and complexity and disappointment and failure and loss as opportunities to grow and to learn and to change. Fly fishing has helped me with humility. It's given me courage, I think, to heal on my own. And, ultimately a certain amount of hope and faith when, we look around in the world and it's difficult to find that these days. For me, fishing is, and I think for others, it's a safe, inviting space for honest reflection and conversation with like-minded others. So when you take that and you look in the literature, we get in most of the literature, here's how I sort of summarize the themes that are drawn from the literature. Healing, helping, hope, understanding of mortality, life and death, understanding of paradox, the uncertainty of life, the mysteries, the contradictions, the things that we often try to think it's either this way or that way. It's sort of like the forward cast and the backward cast, and the up and downstream of the water. Really, where it all happens is the tension, right? I mean, it's the tension between the forward and the backward. It's the tension between upstream and downstream. It's playing that fish in such a way that you have to put yourself in that tension. That's where the learning happens. The literature also teaches people to be, the person who you are sort of meant to be from birth in many cases. And as I mentioned before, skills for leading, for living, and for working. There's a book, a fairly new book. I'm just going to put it up like this. A guy who's actually going to be, who I'm going to be teaching a class with, Fly Fishing for Leadership. His name is John Childress, and he's an organizational guy. He's had years and years of industry experience. So he wrote this interesting book, Fly Fishing for Leadership. And mostly what it does, and does really well, is talk about a bunch of different practical applications that he takes from the water And I'll just mention a bunch of them to give you an idea. So this is what he takes from it that I think, we all do, but why he says that this stuff is useful in teaching people in companies, how to run their organizations more effectively. So he talks about, and I'm just going to list them pretty quickly, but they're all kind of interesting. All of these he's learned on the water. Calm confidence, get feedback from other people, be curious, be self-reliant, be courageous, expect failures, expect mistakes, have a plan going into it, but expect failures. Match the hatch, have an honest assessment of what's out there before you start throwing things in the water. Be humble, be approachable to others. Understand human motivation if you're fishing with other people in particular and how to communicate. Have compassion, have understanding, have respect. Slow down, be in the moment, don't rush. Give and receive help often when you're fishing as you do, at your workplace. Expect danger, unforeseen, unanticipated kinds of actions. Know your own failings and your own faults. Know in advance how to pause and try to correct them when you can. Be creative, be innovative. Understand that what we're dealing with is a world and a water full of uncertainty and mystery and imperfection. Pivot, be ready to pivot and change when you can. And always, communicate effectively with others for new insights, new ideas. Then where the book kind of really lands, and for me, and this is where we start getting into my particular interest my particular interest is this whole notion of what is real leadership, okay? And what he says, and what I'm going to illustrate in others, is leadership and courage. The most important starts from within. So you all might be familiar with Thomas McGuane, who's written a lot in the world of fly fishing literature, but probably best known for a book called The Longest Silence, A Life in Fishing. And he writes briefly, he says, early on, I decided that fishing would be my way of looking at the world. First, it taught me how to look at rivers. Lately, it has been teaching me how to look at people, myself included. And then there's another author that I use a lot. He's an educator. He's not an angler per se. His name is Parker Palmer, and he writes many books on this whole idea of self-awareness. And he wrote, our frequent failure as leaders to deal with our inner lives leaves too many individuals and institutions in the dark. So back to my friend John Childress's book, that's really the focus, is our failure to deal with our inner lives leaves us incapacitated often as leaders when it comes to helping others. And it can be in companies, it can be in schools, it can be in nonprofit organizations, you name it. Okay. So then I want to take all of that and I want to now get to a few of my sort of favorites, starting with A River Runs Through It. But let me just stop for a minute and see if, any reactions to what I've said so far about the value of fly fishing. And just jump on in. If not, that's cool. I can, but before I start reading more, let me just pause. Thoughts, reactions to some of what I've said so far.
I honestly think you're right on. I mean, I agree with all that stuff. I don't put that much thought into it, but I do experience what you're talking about, and I'm finding this incredibly interesting.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks.
I fully agree. And Steve, you and I have had the opportunity to talk over the last couple of years, and just, I know who you are, and I know how passionate. And first off, thank you. If I didn't say it enough, thank you for doing this. And you're right. It kind of hits home with everybody. Just the reflection on it. And everybody's got that experience where you're just kind of like, why am I out here? And then why do I give back? And it's so, we've got a lot of leaders on this call, and, future leaders and people who are giving back, and you wonder where that balance comes in. So we'll let you continue. You have us all on the edge of our seat.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. Well,
let me ditto that. I have
John.
never, I wrote something and I sent it to Amy a while back, and it's just that I experienced when I was sitting on a river one day, and there's something about fly fishing that puts you in touch and almost lets you reach out and touch the face of God sometimes. That's just kind of the way I've felt many, many times on a trout stream, or even on a pond here in Nebraska. It's just, it's I don't know. I can't say anything else.
Yeah. You've said it all. You've said it all. Yeah. And I found myself, like in this conversation, there's so many people. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So many of us have thought about this stuff. I just find it so beautiful that some people are able to write about it, so powerfully, and to sort of pause and use this as a basis for my own reflection. And it's, I always tell people, find yourself a stream, and that can be your backyard, whatever. But I mean it metaphorically. But find yourself a river to go to, and however you find it. So let me pick up with then, sort of the obvious. And I know, Robert Redford's movie made this thing in the early 90s. Unfortunately, more probably did a disservice to fly fishing, but I found it a pretty good movie. But let me just start with a river runs through it. And the reason I want to start with it is I want to just sort of read the beginning and the ending of this book. And there's a lot in between that's beautiful, and that's sad, and that's funny. But I just think it's worth emphasizing how important this is by just reading the beginning. So some of you may know it, so bear with me. The very first sentence of A River Runs Through It. In our family, there was no clear line between religion and fly fishing.
Yeah.
Let me stop there. That lays out the dilemma of this book and the dilemma of living in so many cases. There is no clear line. We can't find, relationships and connections between things that seem not to be connected. It's a dilemma that this whole book is about. It's a book about love. It's about loss. It's about family. But the basic problem is spelled out in the first line of the book. In our family, there was no clear line between religion and fly fishing. So the question becomes, what happens in between that and the ending of the book, where Norman MacLean comes to the insight, eventually all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. The river was cut by the world's great flood and runs over rocks from the basement of time. On some of the rocks are timeless raindrops, under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. I am haunted by waters. Well, people have written entire essays about this, but my claim is that the ending, and Terry's putting up the book. Thank you.
No, this is my poster.
That's your poster, even better. So I've got a cool old edition of the book as well right here. So here's my claim, that Norman MacLean discovers by the end of this book that, we can understand that relationship between religion and fly fishing, because eventually all things do merge into one. Eventually, yes, we do understand the things that we think we can understand that seem to contradict each other. How do you understand and live with such love and loss? How do you live with doubt and faith at the same time? How do you live with hope and fear at the same time? And what he says is eventually you can. All things merge into one. And how do you do it? You do it with the help of a river. What does the river represent here? Well, the river represents life, but it represents a life that is mysterious and uncertain. The last line of this book is really the most important. I am haunted by waters. He doesn't understand the waters. He's haunted by it. And yet it's a source of his salvation. So it's a beautiful story and book. And the first and the last sentences are actually connected, I think, in that way. The other thing I wanted to point out about some of this literature that's just so beautiful, I'm going to take again, River Runs Through It. The way these authors write about the rivers and the water themselves is absolutely stunning. So I'm going to just take a quick example. In the middle of A River Runs Through It, Norman is just on the side of the river waiting for his brother. And here's what he says. I sat there and forgot until what remained was the river that went by and I who watched. On the river, the heat mirages danced with each other and they danced throughout each other, and then they joined hands and danced around each other. Eventually, the watcher joined the river, and there was only one of us. I believe it was the river. Even the anatomy of a river was laid bare. Not far downstream was a dry channel where the river had run once, and part of the way to come to know a thing is through its death. But years ago, I had known the river when it flowed through this now dry channel, so I could enliven its stony remains with the waters of memory. In death, it had its pattern, and we can only hope for as much. Its overall pattern was the favorite serpentine curve of the artist sketched on the valley from my hill to the last hill I could see on the other side. But internally, it was made of sharp angles. It ran seemingly straight for a while, turned abruptly, then ran smoothly again, then met another obstacle, again was turned sharply and again ran smoothly. Straight lines that couldn't be exactly straight and angles that couldn't have been exactly right angles became the artist's most beautiful curve and swept from here across the valley to where it could be no longer seen. I also became the river by knowing how it was made. So what Norman Maclean is doing is actually describing the contour of the river as a human life.
Yep.
He's describing what we all experience, the patterns of sharp angles. They stop, they turn, so it's a beautiful comparison between that flow of the river and the flow of our lives. Another theme of this book that I mentioned before, which is just so touching, is the theme of helping and loving without complete understanding. So I'm now at the end of the book where Norman and his father are talking about Paul, his brother's death. And Norman says, for some time, though, he struggled for more to hold on to. Are you sure you have told me everything you know about his death? He asked. I said, everything. It's not much, is it? No, I replied, but you can love completely without complete understanding. That I have known and preached, my father said. Once my father came back with another question. Do you think I could have helped him? He asked. Even if I might have thought longer, I would have made the same answer. Do you think I could have helped him? I answered. We stood waiting in deference to each other. How can a question be answered that asks a lifetime of questions? It's a beautiful, beautiful passage. That's A River Runs Through It. I want to then switch to Ted Leeson is a wonderful and just a masterful writer This is a book called Jerusalem Creek, Journeys into Driftless Country. He's written several things. The other thing he's written, it's beautiful, it's called The Habit of Rivers. But this in particular is a marvelous book. And I want to share with you again a couple of passages that illustrate why fly fishing literature teaches us so much about, sort of who we are. Okay. So this is from Jerusalem Creek. For there is surely a topography to inner life as there is to what lies outside. The driftless hills are memory, and some memory is driftless, unaltered by the accumulated till of days, untouched by the glacial press of life's sheer ongoingness that cracks and grinds and reworks old stories into new ones or carries them away. Certain places and people and times abide, the resistant outcrops of a life that are weathered into relief by a slow erosion of the delible and impermanent, laying bare the stratigraphies of a private landscape, graphed in layers of causes and consequences, bringing old stories to the light of day. They are formed to shapes of what we remember by longing, love, grief, regret, joy, and self-reproach that run like rivers and carve furrows in the heart. What remains is enduring but not immutable, for even recollection itself has a kind of friction that smooths whatever it touches, like the image on an old coin rubbed soft by constant handling. Every memory is also a forgetting, and every name an elegy. Another, again, a beautiful description of our inner life and how it imitates the life of nature and the life of water. Also want to read a couple of sections from the same book, Jerusalem Creek. And this, interesting, like Norman MacLean, listen how he describes the rivers and our inner lives. One comes to appreciate that interior order inheres everywhere in the natural world. Patterns that ultimately have reasons. Why the ratio pi, for instance, crops up so often and in such unexpected context, or why pigeons bob their heads when they walk but still beg explanation. These internal consistencies of meandering, if themselves not readily accounted for, are part of our intuitive understanding of rivers. So again, he's describing rivers as our lives, as a meandering, kind of an interesting way of looking at it. He says, meandering is the curve of curiosity and exploration, and sometimes of discovery. Digressive and indirect, obedient only to an inner logic of its own, but open to serendipity, its own justification, because it answers to something elemental in nature, human and otherwise. The meandering, of rivers. And similarly, here's how Leeson describes how he learns on a river. Each spring creek taught us something new, and we carried that idea back to other places. And so each stream was remade each time we fished it, increasingly familiar, but always brand new. Such backtracking, piecemeal approaches are not the quick way, but are perhaps the most authentic. Indirection, I think, is the path of all intimate knowing. It is the way you come to learn both the places and people closest to the heart. You find them out gradually and in fragments, in flashes of personality, in quiet glimpses of character, in fleeting moods, in bits of biography. And even in those elusive parts, it's all about why you love them. And further on, he says, to finish that chapter, for the curve on a valley floor, given its own interior consistency by curiosity and desire and a sense of the beautiful, with a lot of traveling sideways to gain a little distance forward, with more motion than progress. It's not terribly efficient, but in the end covers the ground pretty well. That's Ted Leeson. And then I want to switch to something that I think many of you, more than I, will fully appreciate. Forward in the next couple of weeks or months, he's coming out with one called Casting Onward. He is a veteran, military service, as well as police captain. And he wrote this book about how he took his daughter throughout the state of Texas on a fly fishing journey. And I want to read some of what Ramirez says. I found it particularly powerful. Okay. Now bear with me. These are a little longer, but I think you'll see why I found them particularly powerful and relevant. When I first read Ernest Hemingway's Nick Adams stories, I liked them. I especially liked the story of Nick fly fishing on the Big Two-Hearted River. That, by the way, to digress, Ernest Hemingway, everybody knows of. If you haven't had a chance to read the short story, Big Two-Hearted River, it's a wonderful story about his coming to terms, the main character coming to terms with his service in World War I. I was a kid then, and the real meaning eluded me. When I returned home from my time in the Marine Corps, after the death of my best friend, after the death of my happy illusions, I read it again. This time I understood everything, and I knew that I had been transformed, as were the rivers that reflected my now battle-scarred face. Whenever I see my own reflection, I see what is behind the lines that radiate from weary eyes, behind any optimistic smile, and behind the scars. I am reminded of a favorite William Stafford poem. They tell how it was and how time came along and how it happened again and again. They tell the slant life takes when it turns and slashes your face as a friend. Any wound is real. In church, a woman lets the sun find her cheek and we can see the lesson. There are years in that book. There are sorrows a choir can't reach when they sing. Rows of children lift their faces of promise, places where the scars will be. All my adult life, says Ramirez, I have searched for some balance between my existence as a warrior and the peace for which I yearn. I know that I am both warrior and poet inside. And although both spirits are true, I'd rather paint with words than pieces of lead. All my adult life, I have carried a firearm, not only as an implement of the hunting ethic, but as an implementation of war. As a Marine, I always had my M16 Uzi pistol or shotgun by my side. They were extensions of my being, and they sent fast, hot lead toward any target that my mind willed them to impact. As a Texas master peace officer, my pistol, shotgun, and AR-15 has served the same purpose. I have spent many hours training young warriors. In fact, I've made my living at it for many years. I have lived my life striving to focus on what is beautiful, and yet have always understood the evil that waits out there. Throughout this journey, my spirit has yearned for a time when I no longer live with the threat of conflict, deadly or otherwise. I have grown weary of humanity's darkness and wish to focus my eyes toward its distant flickering light. I have ached for the day when the only arm I ever raise is my casting arm. And then he talks about meeting somebody. And he said, 1 week before Christmas, I found out that one of the young peace officers that I had trained at the academy was shot in the head by armed robbers. He was a kid not too long ago. I remember his smile. When I first heard the news that he was still alive, I suspected he was standing in a place where I have stood, at the river's edge, not knowing if he will make the crossing. I wondered if he was peaceful. I wondered if he could feel his wife's hand in his. How many young men and women have lived this moment in Iraq and Afghanistan and the streets of our cities? And then, just a few days ago, I learned that he had died. I felt that old empty feeling that makes me hate the sound of bugles and formations of jets overhead. In the end, there is no end, and nothing is good or bad. It just is. Nature reminds me of this. The river teaches me to remember. And then just a few other things from Ramirez, which I found very powerful. This is a chapter in this book called Headwaters. The headwaters of each hill country river seem childlike. There is an abundance about the way they bubble up from limestone springs and meander under the trees carrying leaves and mayflies like it's nobody's business. I like that. It feels right. After decades of spilling out where society drains me, I'm ready to go home. It's counterintuitive how complicated it is to make life simple again. The first step is to stop thinking and begin to understand the wrongness of complexity. Life is simple, and we need to keep it that way. The second step is to start letting go of things, including expectations. I've been giving away my stuff like a dying man. I've given away everything that I don't need or use, including furniture, pots, pans, dishes, clothes, and 3 truckloads of books. I have let go of unreasonable expectations and have learned to take life in stride. The boy I once was is far wiser than the man I've allowed myself to become. It's time to go backward until I find the original me, back at the headwaters of being alive. I know that I'm not alone in my aloneness. There are others who are reading these words and are wondering, what am I doing following such an unhappy path while my lifetime bleeds out of me? And yet we get back in that saddle each day and cross that empty, soulless lifescape, making a living while failing to live. Why? When I stand in the headwaters of a hill country stream, it's like seeing a picture of a younger me before the expectations of self and others began to crush my spirit. Living like that isn't living. It's the difference between being a reservoir and a lake. One lives naturally as it should, while the other exists so that it can only be slowly drained as the water brokers see fit. Life should meander, not drain.
Yeah.
And one last passage from Ramirez. Chronologically, for me, this was quite moving and personal. I am getting older with each passing day. Folks call it middle age, but that is also a lie because almost no man lives to be 103. Things begin to change for a man in this part of his life. If he has any sense of self, soul, and spirit, he cannot help but notice. He sees his life slipping away like a leaf floating down a hill country stream. His life rushes and spills over the limestone and under the cypress trees. He can see the birds in the sky and the fish in the stream, but they are both worlds apart from the leaf and where it is going. The leaf will sink to the bottom and join the many pieces of the stream. In time, these silent souls come to life again. Fresh leaves of springtime shade the stream and hold the birds in the palm of their hands. This will happen no matter if a man pays attention or not. It is the way of things. I have learned that much of what seemed so important in the past was like building something with blocks of air. I have learned that the agenda of the world of society is a selfish and foolish one. It seems that the world knows very little about living. Still, there is a price to be paid for paying attention. I have been paying attention more and more each day. I have noticed that as I pay attention, the little boy is finding his way home. These days, green lizards are looking me in the eye more often. I have noticed that the more I am present in the moment, without the clutter and noise of adulthood, the more authentically I am living. The trees seem greener, the breeze cooler, the rain more welcome, and people are naked and ridiculous in their self-importance. I think I'm growing younger. So I will stop at that point. You know, again, for me, all of this is a way, fly fishing, doing it, reading about it, thinking about it, is a way of, for me, leading a life of greater self-examination and greater purpose. But one thing to end on that I should say, one of the great psychologists, who is a guy that I've studied a lot, Jung, who is the guy who, you know, is the basis of the depth psychology that I talked about earlier. He was famous because he wanted everybody to look at dreams and the meaning of dreams. I don't know the exact quote, but to conclude, he also made it clear in one of his books that sometimes when we dream about fishes, they're just fishes. So not to take this all too terribly seriously, you know, and to always have fun, you know, doing what we're doing. So anyway, thanks for listening. I really appreciate it, and appreciate you letting me indulge. Again, let me just ask, how does this resonate, you know, with your own experience, or any of these themes in particular? You may, like me, I probably don't think about it much while I'm casting, but, you know, given this opportunity, what resonates with you?
I was a Cub Scout when I caught my first trout on a
Really?
bare line and a bare hook in a small lake in Arizona. And ever since then, ironically enough, I was afraid to kill that fish. I put him back in the water. And knowing that that was part of life as well as death, to save that life was far better than to take it. So for me, at 71 years old now, I've learned a lot about life. Yes, fishing and religion are one.
And isn't it interesting, at least for you, what I just read from that book?
Oh, yes.
First thing you think about is a boy, a childhood memory.
Yes.
And you know, that says a lot. I think it says a lot.
Well, fishing has been my out. Fishing has been my peace. It's been my discipline. It's been my redemption. It's been my opportunity to look upon my life and see what's not right but not wrong. So, yes, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for those comments. I'm curious if there's any of this that people, you know, took issue with. Our question.
Well, I don't know about everybody else, but I say this to just about everybody that I go with, or everybody that I leave behind as I go out to the water, is that I get in the middle of the water, and even if I'm spending the whole day tying on tippet and new flies and don't really get too much fishing in, the water flowing over me, around me, takes all my cares away. You know, this, and we were birthed in water, so this doesn't feel unnatural to me, although I don't think I came out with waders on.
Yeah.
I think I mean, it's been interesting, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of reflection on this, Steve, afterwards. Just because it was, I mean, you could have stopped with the river runs through it, and I think we were all still just captivated just from, I mean, because I think all of a sudden you just saw the mines and everything else, and I think with all of the thought to it, and we don't go out there and think of why we're there. I mean, we just feel that need, and I think it just pulls us to be out there and to enjoy that. I know it's a challenge, it's a piece. I know what I love about talking about fishing is most people have a great memory of it from when they were a child. They fished with their dad, they fished with their grandpa. Somewhere it's a very safe place to have a conversation in general. Then we get into the fly fishing side, but that's a whole different thing. But I'm saying, just as far as an icebreaker, when you're getting to meet people, it's the most reflective time that you get to allow yourself to have. And especially as things get busier and busier, it's just that we don't ever get to call that time out. We think we do, but just to be able to be out on the water. And I know just from this past weekend, and I stand purposely. I don't listen to headphones. I don't want any other noise, but I want that water sound the whole time. And that's where I can't hear people. I can't anything. And I think that it's something to be said for what we need to recharge our batteries.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. You know, and it'll humble the best of anyone. So on the other side, it's all the best of anything that I've ever been able to experience in my life.
Yeah.
I agree. I tell
Jim.
people that fishing is my Prozac. I mean, I go there to unwind. As a matter of fact, my loving wife, when I get a little crabby, she'll look at me and she'll point at me, look at me straight in the face, says, "You need to go fishing." That's absolutely right. That's exactly what I need.
Yep. I hear that often. Mine is I need a little water time, and I hear that to me, and that's usually the nice version.
My mantra is, when the going gets tough, Jim goes fishing.
And I love the first part of it with the challenges and how, I mean, it's never the same. It's never, you can fish the same water 2 days in a row, and one day they'll take this, the next day they won't. And it's a constant puzzle. And it's so energizing to figure out, because it's never the same. But it is something where I think that part of it, again, you don't ever walk up just like bored. You know, it's not like driving to and from work and you just go, "Oh my gosh, I just drove to work," and you don't even remember driving. Unfortunately, and it's more just because it's just that monotony. Going out on the water, it's a trick every time, and you've got to figure out how to put those puzzle pieces together.
I mean, all those skills and attributes that we talked about, you're absolutely right. And I'm convinced if we could take all of that and bring it back, you know, those of us who, I'm not anymore, but those of us who are still, you know, have working, if we could really take not just the skills, but the insights, I think we'd all be better off for it.
I might be, I'll say that I think what time on the water for me brings back patience. It allows me to bring back patience for whether or not it's every situation, I think. And I think that's the one thing that, you know, from the different parts of it, it corrects our behaviors, because again, the water, the fish, whatever it is, but it helps us come back and be more patient, more humble, because you get humiliated out there sometimes. And I think all of it, it's time well spent.
Well, you know, the one thing we didn't mention, that I haven't mentioned, but it always concerns me, is that, you know, part of the responsibility, I think, as fishers, but particularly fly fishers, is the stewardship and the conservation and what we do to maintain this wonderful environment that we, you know, can say all these wonderful words about. And, you know, part of it's in big trouble right now. When we look at what's happening with the drought, we look at the Colorado, we look at the, you know, situation in the Northwest with the dams and the salmon, you know, you name it, the fires, the climate stuff. So that's a whole other aspect of this. You know, there's a responsibility that comes with this in order for us to continue to talk like this. You know, I think everybody has to do what they can to practice that as well.
And Steve, this is the other Terry. You were asking him positives, negatives. Not really a negative, but your Hemingway story.
Yeah. Big Two-Hearted River.
That touched me. And I don't know if it'll be a good way or a bad way until tomorrow morning, because it brought up some PTSD issues that I hadn't dealt with yet.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see how that works out.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to bring that up. So when you do this again, not if, consideration or a warning beforehand kind of thing. I don't know which would be appropriate, because I mean, I enjoyed the whole thing. It just, it really brought up some stuff for me. Like I said, now I have to deal with it, and I've got the tools for it. So we'll see if I can get through it tonight. And thank you for that.
Terry, thanks for your honesty. I'm sorry about contributing to any discomfort and unsettling.
No, don't be sorry about it, because my psychiatrist, my counselors, everybody else, you got to deal with all that.
Yeah.
At some point in time.
Yeah.
And they hadn't reached that. And if I need their assistance, I can call my counselor at any time, day or night. So I'm more than ready to take on that challenge this evening.
Okay. Well, again, I appreciate your honesty, and as well as your suggestion to continue to be sensitive to that.
And I'm definitely also going to look to purchase that Fly Fishing for Leadership, because my company is opening a new division that I'm in charge of.
Oh, good.
So I'm going to try and put some military leadership and fly fishing in all together.
There you go.
Awesome. Before we close, I've got that. Amy, do you have that
Lois,
list of books?
Steve, I do, and I'll email that out. Lois has her hand up. We're not used to seeing that on this format, but Lois is raising her hand.
Oh, I see. So. I see. Thanks.
So I'm going to be real quick, but
hi, Lois.
Hi. Thank you for doing this. I just want to mention that a lot of us aren't religious, and the symbolism between the two, even if we're not, is thoroughly understood and not offensive. But what I really wanted to say was that my work with some of the veterans, and I am one of them, is that you're so busy with fly fishing that you are totally in the present. And that's a big deal for anybody. We're all so stressed out and this and that, and even if we're bored, to be in the present is a big deal. So thanks for bringing all this, and I just wanted to tell you, good job.
Thanks, Lois. I really appreciate that, and you're right. Being in the moment is all that, isn't it? Well, thanks again, everybody. Amy's going to pass out that book list. So, and it's got my number on it. If anybody, feel free to call if you want to, talk more about this stuff.
Thank you, Steve.
And I appreciate it, Steve. And I think it's, and again, it was different. I think Steve needs to do like books on tape, because how many people were mesmerized when he was reading some of those passages where it was like, you can just keep on reading there, Steve.
I have to confess, when I was younger, I did some acting, and I love this stuff.
Well, and that was one of the things is it just the tone and getting in. And I thought, oh man, he could really do a book on tape on all of this. But it was very good, and it's heartfelt. And I know that, and I will say that, you know, again, everybody's journey is separate with all of this. And I think that's the part too, but we have so many common denominators with why we're there and what we want to bring back, whether or not we're helping at this stage or whether or not we're a participant at this stage, but we want something and we don't know what it is. And I think that this part of it to articulate that was just awesome. So I appreciate that. And I will distribute the list and it'll have Steve's information. He's also always looking for somebody to fish with. Don't let him borrow your flies because then he'll catch more fish than you. But anyway, no. But it is something where, again, this is the really cool part about what we do virtually now is just something different, just something totally different. Next week, Jim Stanley is going to be tying for us from Colorado Springs, and he's going to be tying the Outlander. Did I say that right, Steve? I didn't bring. I had him up at my desk. I held up my whole letter and everything, and I was bragging on that today. And so he's got a really cool fly that it's gonna get some fish in this area. So if you can join next Monday, Jim will be our tire, and we'll be doing everything. Repeat, rinse, same channel, all that stuff too. If I don't send out the reminder, just click on the link. So in case I almost forgot today.
Yes, thank you, Amy.
You're very welcome. And hey, by the way, I'm going to eat trout now. So yes, that was I kept my fish this weekend. Yes, I did. So
I just had gotten fish sticks, so
no, I'll send you this picture.
Officers do. They eat fish sticks.
I'll enjoy my fish sticks then. But yeah, John, I'll be sending you this picture because I didn't send it with you, but I was doing double dry hoppers, and I just got it. And back to when Steve first started this and that whole lesson in humility and how you kind of get in and finding that balance. So I had lost 2 previously. They just broke it off. I was on 7X, and on the second, on the dropper, they took that, or it wasn't a dropper, it was 2 hoppers. Just trying out stuff, just messing with things, one fly after another. And I saw everybody else was catching. I'm like, I'm staying with dries all weekend. So I got 2, they both broke off. That third one, I was shaking so bad. The adrenaline was going so bad because I'm like, just get it to hand, just get it to hand. And then when they flash and you still get that, and you're like, your heart's in your chest and you're going, I just want to touch it. Anyway, so yeah, I got that one in, and I saved the fly for that. It was just a foam hopper, just with foam and the legs, and that one nailed it. So that's what my dinner is tonight. I don't know what, it's just on the grill right now. But anyway, it was, again, where you get into that, you've got to back yourself down. You've got to figure out what it is. I'm like, don't horse it. Don't just let it just happen. And so many times it's just let it happen. Just let it happen and be present. So
Amy, anyway. I'm going to make a Tenkara fisherman out of you yet. With that attitude, I'm going to make a Tenkara fisherman out of you.
You know right where I was, John, when I nailed this one. It was right there on our sidewalk.
Right there. Yep.
And I was going upstream, and it hit right in the foam. And the water is, oh my gosh, it's down even for that spring, putting out 100 million gallons a day. It was still down a foot lower. You could have walked out on the rocks even. Gin clear. It was low. We need rain so bad. But it was tough. And but anyway, it was just a blast. But it was one of those things. And you look around when you're done with everything, and you're looking around. My hands were shaking so much that I thought, oh, I'm going to drop it out of the net. I don't know why. I don't know why I got that, but look around, and I had the whole place to myself. And that's I had to walk 30 feet down, 30 yards maybe. And I had to go ask a young lady if I could borrow her stringer. Because I was like, I'm taking this one home. And I thought, short of throwing it up on the concrete. But I was like, and she just kept looking at me and go, I'm sorry, be here in 15 minutes, but I don't have a stringer right now. And I thought, but yeah, anyway, but that excitement, it brings us back every single time. Yeah. And it's never going to be the same.
He didn't have a tenkara fly in his mouth, did he?
He did not. He had he had a foam hopper. When we run out of things, I'll go back to my foam hoppers. But Mick's wife, Margie, she got 3 on Sunday. It was just, and again, it's that personal, it's your goals. It's very, very tiny goals, but it's goals. And I think that's what keeps bringing us back every time, is just that optimism. We're internal optimistic people coming back to waters. So anyway, I'm going to go eat, folks, and I will see you guys next Monday. Have a great, safe week. And thanks, everybody. Good. Steve, thank you very much. Great presentation. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Steve.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.